Sitting in your car one evening after work, feeling paralyzed with the thought of entering the house and even looking at your children because you're consumed with the thoughts of how easy it was for your husband to die. Here you are, left to keep trying to live, to try and help your kids get through this mess. And yet his act of suicide has set off a whole new chain of thought in your head. It feels taboo to share your own thoughts of joining him and taking your kids with you by your side. As you recognize all the feelings associated with this decision disturbs you just enough to get you out and taking action. You know this defining moment could be the one you act upon, either to end the pain, the torment, and the heartache, or to change your mindset and get on with living life. Wow, what a wake-up call to catch yourself thinking like this, and yet knowing that you are not the only one who has and will feel this way. Holly shares her story because she knows others have thought these types of thoughts, and by choosing to speak her journey, she allows others to hear the message that there is a way to be free from the pain, the suffering, and all of the heartache. For those who are left after a loved one's suicide, there is hope, love, and purpose for each of us in this world. Have you ever had one of those gut-wrenching moments where life ground you to your knees and you found yourself asking in despair, why me? This podcast is all about sharing your stories and journeys, from asking why me to declaring this is why me. Discover how ordinary human beings like you and I have found their extraordinary levels of hope, courage, compassion, and provided a new perspective for greater potential and self-empowerment during their darkest defining moment. As a creative artist and coach myself, my guests and I discuss the interconnectedness of emotion and transformation in those moments, and how their actions then seize the opportunity for discovering their unfiltered and authentic voice, and ultimately their life's purpose. I invite you to join me each week as we share insights into how adversity can be turned into a unique advantage. Today's guest is Holly Thorpe, founder of Embracing Change. Holly had left her husband 7 years prior to his suicide. What followed for Holly was learning to forgive and show up differently in her life. I wanted to paraphrase something Holly posted on her page, as I feel it opens a conversation as to why she chose to use her voice to help others going through emotional pain and loss. So many times I hear people say, I don't have a purpose anymore. Why am I even here? This feeling can be especially strong after loss. Did you open your eyes today? Is your heart beating? You have a purpose. What if your purpose is to experience, to receive, to give, to trust? Welcome to the WhyMe podcast, Holly.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here, and I love what you're doing, Vera-Lee. It is amazing. I hear stories, and to be able to share on this platform is a wonderful experience for me, and I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. If you had to choose one book, Holly, that has really impacted your life, what would it be?
You know, there are so many books, but I'm going to have to say The Untethered Soul. Right. If I was to pick, there's so many. That one really spoke to me, Michael Singer, and all of his work.
Yeah, I know of a number of people who have recommended that book, and I haven't read it yet. I will be. I have a long list.
Yes,
books I've been recommended
so
now.
Many. I just want to be that sponge that just sucks it in.
Yeah.
And there's so much beautiful work out there. Yeah, that one really, really spoke to me.
Yeah, I love it when you find a book that resonates, a book
Yes,
or a person or a podcast or whatever medium it is, when you find something that resonates, a message that really hits home and allows you to learn more and grow more is always a good thing.
absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So, Holly, how about you share with us a little bit about your story and your defining moment?
A turning point for me was one day I had been out working all day. My kids were home from school. They were not going to school. They had lost their father to suicide um, maybe a month, several weeks before that. And I had taken some time off of school or off of work. And now I was going back to work. And I had been triggered all day, all week, all month. But this particular day was really tricky. I was getting phone calls from my kids crying. They were crying and in tears and yelling and fighting. And there was just so much turmoil and anger. And I felt it just throughout the whole entire day. And this just heavy fear. I did not want to go home. And I knew I had to go home. I didn't know what I was walking into at home. There had already been holes punched in the walls. There were threats. I was so fearful that one of them would end up committing suicide. Also, I'd done all this reading already on how to help children and what can happen with children. And so I'd already kind of worked up into this state of mind of just being afraid of going home, not wanting to go home, so much anxiety. I can remember pulling into my driveway and just sitting there in my car. I don't even think I opened the garage at that point because I didn't want the kids to hear that I had come home. And I just sat out there and I was crying and crying and crying, just searching. You know how your mind does that? It's like, what thought can I think that'll relieve me of this pain and suffering? And I started thinking about their dad and how easy it was for him to die. And at first I was very angry. And then I thought, you know what? It was so easy. He just died. And now he doesn't have this, all of this that I have, you know? And I started thinking about that. It wouldn't be that hard for me to die, but I can't do it without my kids. I would never leave my kids. What if the three of us just left this life? I mean, it's terrible to even speak it out loud. But in that state of mind, it was real. It was real for me. And I found some sort of a comfort with that, which really, really disturbed me. As I kind of started to fantasize about it and started to think, now, how would we do that? I caught myself knowing that was not okay. And I wasn't okay. They weren't okay. And I had to do something different. That was a defining moment in that, even though there were lots of struggles after, I started to look at things differently and start to take active steps in learning to, number one, forgive and be there for my kids.
Wow. Can I say thank you for sharing that? Some people would be hesitant in sharing those thoughts. And I am thankful that you have, because many people have found themselves thinking those thoughts. And it really was quite a wake-up call for you, wasn't it? Like catching yourself in that comfort within that mindset.
It absolutely was. It was such a wake-up call. And even though it is hard to speak, I know for a fact I'm not the only one that has felt that way, which is why I speak it.
Yeah.
It is really important to me and has been since this experience and since I've I've done the work that I have so far to help other people be able to look at it and recognize that there really is a different way. There really, really is. We can be free of the pain, the suffering that we experience in this life.
Did you feel in that moment that you could ever feel free?
In that moment, I don't know that I understood that concept of freedom. In that, although I did in that moment for a moment feel that if the three of us disappeared from this life, we would be free.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as I recognized how disturbing that was, like there was something about that, I knew that my thinking was off, that I had to figure out a way to achieve that feeling while still being here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So I'm wondering, in that moment, you are not thinking 100% rationally. You're very overcome with a level of emotion that has led you to plan. So we've gone beyond the thought and we've gone into the planning stage. How are we going to do this? The three of us.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, in that moment, although it was a wake-up call, it's not like you could just snap out of it. How did you work through to go from that planning stage to, hang on a minute, I'm feeling this is disturbing me. This is not quite right. I don't think that this is where I do actually want to go. How did you then move through that to get out of the car and not act upon that?
Well, that is a really, really good question. I think I know that the thought came to me that there's more than just me and my two boys in my life. I have, my family that would be devastated. And because the suicide had just happened a month before, maybe, I saw the pain of his side of the family.
Yeah.
And what would that do to just leave everybody? Like that wasn't okay. It would just be so devastating. And honestly, it was inspiration. It was an intervention, whatever it was, because not everybody does come through that.
Yeah.
And I'm sensitive to that. But for me in that moment, I really, for whatever reason, that little thought came into my mind. There are other people, Holly. There are other people that need you. And I was able to gather myself up enough. And my kids, by the time I walked into the house, all of this big, like, horrific story that I had built up in my mind, that's all it was. It was something huge. And that's another thing that I've learned is, just because of I have certain thoughts or beliefs going on in my mind, that doesn't necessarily mean that is what is happening. And so I got distracted and started to take steps, and things kind of eased up naturally. And so that's how that particular night went.
Wow. Do you think that your kids picked up on that energy when you came into the space?
It's really hard to tell because I was still very disconnected. I was, and this is the thing. This is the thing that has really motivated me with the work that I'm doing, is when you're a parent and you have this sense of caring and love for your children, and this thing just slams you. It's like you want to be there, and you read all the the books and the professionals, and they all tell you what to do, and you can't feel it, and you've got to be right with yourself. But yet then there's this part of yourself that says, but you don't have time to take care of yourself. Like you've got to constantly be helping and making and doing and ensuring that. And so I was still a bit disconnected at that point, thinking in my mind, repeating these stories. You've got to go to, you've got to go to work, Holly. You don't have time to do this. You've got to make sure the kids are in school. They have to, they have to go to their classes. They have to, and it was like this state of panic. But eventually, I really was able to organize and prioritize what needed to happen, and that was something that really helped.
Yeah, that's bringing some order into that chaotic feeling, isn't it, of all these shoulds, and in actual fact,
Yes.
it's a little bit of that put your own oxygen mask on first, otherwise how can you really be there for everybody else? It's a huge point in your life, and as you said, it's only a month since your ex-husband had taken his own life. The amount of emotional pain in there, I think you said it was 7 years since you had separated.
Correct.
Were you and the kids still in reasonably regular contact with him?
Yes, we were. In fact, the divorce was very traumatizing. The relationship toward the end became abusive and dangerous for me. And there was a lot of history of parental alienation. There were police visits. There was a lot. But over time, we were able to be in each other's space. He had just moved into a different home, and we lived pretty close. And so there was a lot of back and forth, and he adored our boys. It seemed like he just lived for them. And so it was a shock that this had happened. And I'd already felt even before that, like I didn't have enough skills to be a good single mom. Because he constantly reminded me of what a terrible person I was. And in his emotional pain, I didn't understand that. So I was in this, like, I was protecting myself, and my self-confidence was very, very low. And so now that even though he and I were relating pretty well to each other, I still felt like he was always the better parent because he often reminded me of that. And so then when he died the way that he did, I was so angry at him. I was so resentful of him that how could he leave me with this? And I don't know what I'm doing. And so a lot of, even though we were, like I said, in a pretty good place, it just brought up so much unresolved resentment and anger that I needed to own, that I didn't understand I needed to own. I had been telling my victim story for so long in my mind. And maybe on the outside, it looked like, oh, it's amazing. You guys can get along now. It looks like you guys have forgiven each other, whatever. No, I didn't even realize to the degree that I was holding on to this victim identity.
That woe is me state is actually very addictive, and it is something that becomes almost like an attitude or a way of being or a habit, if you like. And I see it a lot on social media, where it's quite apparent when you start going through some people's feed, when you see this pattern of woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. The interesting thing with the WhyMe Movement and the WhyMe podcast is that we all understand that woe is me state because we've all been there at some point in time. And it's not about the judgment of someone who is in that state. It's like a level of awareness. And so it often takes something. It takes an event. It takes a moment. It takes a number of moments or something repeating over and over and over again before we go, oh, something needs to change here. And it's actually me. It's the way that I am responding. And that moment is a real epiphany moment. And some people don't get that level of awareness at the surface life. Sometimes it takes a really big event for that to happen. And this is a normal process that hopefully we all will go through, because to stay in that woe is me state, although we're getting the benefit of the attention and the sympathy from other people, and sometimes that can create a certain type of connection, it's not sustainable and it's not something that allows us to feel fulfilled in our life. And so being able to have those moments where we go, okay, I'm now going to be completely accountable and responsible for that state, and I'm going to do something about changing it. There's a whole lot of personal growth that then can happen once we get there. And I think one of the important things, and I'd like to know your experience, your lived in experience with this, I think one of the important things is to release any guilt or shame or judgment that we put upon ourselves for when we were in that state. What has been your experience with moving forward from that moment of, you know what, I realize that I'm in this woe is me state and I realize that I want to change? Did you struggle with those feelings of guilt or shame or any of that through that process?
Absolutely. And that is such a good question, because I don't think you can move past it. If you're in a state of feeling, identifying with victim identity, victimhood, whatever you want to call it, it's like all this stuff is happening to me. These they're happening to me, and it's not fair. There's a sense of shame and guilt that's associated with that, because what I really honestly, like what I believe and what I've learned about myself is that everything that I'm projecting out is actually a mirror to myself. And working, I that was the only path to freedom, was to work through that and look at that, the guilt and the shame. And I can't even tell you how many nights of pure just writhing in pain and anguish, emotional pain and anguish so deep, to release that, to find some kind of relief. And I'll tell you what helped me a lot was journaling, because I had to get out of my head. I would go into these loops that would not stop. I mean, these thoughts that would just like keep coming into my mind, and every thought there would be some kind of a reinforcement to why, maybe this was my fault. Maybe I did cause his depression, maybe the divorce, and now I've ruined my children's lives. And I am literally the worst person that ever lived. And I'm not worthy of breathing the same air as anybody else. I had to work through all of that. And it was a process. It's something that once you get on that path and you start to realize that is your only freedom, and it is freedom. It is freedom. You'll decide that you want that, and then there's no going back. And I mean, you might end up, sometimes your mind will go back into that state of being a victim, but you're able to identify it now and feel the power that comes from doing something about it, with understanding that you absolutely have to watch your thoughts. You absolutely have control of how you entertain what shows up in your mind. And that was so empowering to me. And so even today, when I have a feeling of guilt or shame, it's a whole lot easier to identify what feels like in my body and to change the script. I don't have to be tied to that script anymore. Yeah. And I'm the one that freed myself, because everybody else is going to disappoint me no matter what. It doesn't matter. And so why do I even hold anybody to giving them that power to disappoint me? I get to be free. I get to choose.
Wow. There is so much in there, and there's an awful lot of personal growth that you've done to get to that point, which is fantastic. And it does take a lot of courage to be able to really look at yourself from that really deep place and say, you know what, can I question myself with those questions? Was him taking his life my fault? These are questions that a lot of people feel very scared to even ask, because they are scared of what the answer may be, or they're scared of that really, really intense emotion. And it's natural, again, to be scared of these things. Nobody likes to feel at the depths of despair. Nobody likes to feel guilt. Nobody likes to be asking these questions. However, the fact that you understood the importance of going through that process to then be able to release and be free from that. You also mentioned about the information your body was giving you, and you don't quite feel, that everything is going well. It's such an important part of that process. And if I can just note that when you were in that moment in your car, and I asked you the question about, did you pick up on the energy of your children when you walked into their space, knowing that there was, again, very strong energy with where they were at on that day. And your response was about being quite disconnected still at that point in time. This process that you've just described really explains a lot of that work that you need to do to be truly connected to who you are at your core, to really have that connection with yourself, to really be putting the oxygen mask on yourself, because when you go through that process, sometimes you feel like you need an oxygen mask on. Literally, it is not easy to go through that process. Now that you have done that and you've started to make that connection with yourself, how did that help you with helping your children? Because they are the other party in this scenario, in this situation in your life. They are hurting as well. So how did that unfold after you started doing that really deep work for yourself?
Yes, and that has been a process. But I was able to stop being so afraid of the worst case scenario. My biggest fear my biggest fear for me was that I would lose them, That was a thread that ran through me for years after and around the divorce time, because I was threatened with that so often. And there was actually a period of time where he didn't let me see the kids. And it was very, it was very tough. It was a lot. Oh my goodness. Talk about, this is one thought that I've had is as I've gone through this whole process, is how do you embrace the unwanted? Like this, all of this is unwanted. I never wanted to be a divorced person. Like, oh, the shame of that, and how I know I've judged others. Like, I know I've felt sorry for people that were divorced. And so I find myself in the situation, and oh no, I'm so full of shame now. I'm like afraid for my life. I've like abuse, like what? Domestic violence. Oh my gosh, that's so shameful. Um, and then suicide, like, oh my gosh, talk about shame with that. I had to recreate a new how do I word it? I had to recreate a new perception, a new a new canvas for what I had painted before. Like that wasn't what it is now. And how do I come to terms? Like, how do I merge that? How do I come to terms with that? I had to learn to do that in order to let my kids know that it's okay. They were full of shame. I can remember, my kids, the things that they said right after it happened, I would jot down all their little thoughts and little things that they said. And one of the things they said multiple times was, I wish Dad had gotten sick instead of this.
Right.
And that's how he would have died.
It's Vera-Lee from Australia, the founder of the WhyMe Movement and podcast. Well, one idea, one vision, one person. This self-funded podcast and movement has started to take a life of its own, which is exactly where I had planned it would be. To hear the stories of the far-reaching impact across many countries in this world, it humbles me to know that my vision is shared, understood, and positively influencing people to look at the changes they can make for their own adversity and how they can find the strength, the courage to be inspired and feel connected and empowered to use their adversity to their advantage. One of the best ways that you can help support the WhyMe Movement and podcast is to subscribe to the various channels, such as the podcast platform you are listening to this on now and the YouTube channel, which has much bonus content released. By subscribing, you will make sure that you are one of the first to find out who is coming up next, more about our guests, and the interesting questions that I ask them, which do not get released on the podcast platforms, and lots of other good bonus content. I always love reading your comments, and so please feel free to leave them on each of the platforms. The beauty of social media is that you can easily share single episodes or any of that bonus content from YouTube onto your own social media platform with your friends, which helps to bring this positive, inspiring message to far more people, allowing you to be an active participant in the WhyMe movement and vision. On Apple Podcasts, it always makes a big difference if you can leave a rating, review, and subscribe to the show. Let's get back to today's story.
And that really struck me with the shame that they carried. And so, I was full of just wanting to be an advocate for them. I saw what was happening with school and feeling like, well, nobody really knew what to do to get them to go back to school. How did we handle all of this stuff? So that actually was a huge part of again with them over time was really being in tune with what their needs were at the time. And so I was an occupational therapist. I was working in home health. And another thing that really helped was I worked with clients who went through loss. Like every person that I worked with had a story to tell of loss. And some people were really still very stuck in it and felt purposeless when their spouse died or their situation died, like they had no purpose. And I just have a purpose and I'm going to hold on to my purpose, whatever that is. And so some of those experiences really did help me with my kids. And then also learning to accept what is. My one son has gotten quite involved and has had some challenges with substances and substance abuse. And that's something that we're currently dealing with right now. And so it's just a constant learning of letting go and it's more than just logically saying it.
Yeah.
There's got to be a change of heart. That's where the work comes in. I think there's been times where I've been frustrated because I'll say, I know, what I need to do, or I believe that, but you don't feel it. You have to practice it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's a really important part of this journey to be discussing is that practice. And with a lot of mindset training, CBT and lots of different types of looking at retraining the internal environment and the internal language that we use to talk to ourselves, it takes practice. And a lot of people out there give the message of positive affirmations. Tell yourself this every morning. Here's some cards, read them out every day for 30 days. And you can say, yeah, okay. I think affirmations can definitely work when it is explained to someone that you might not feel it for a while and you need to practice all of these different things. You need to put into place the strategies and then practice them even when you don't feel it, because it's not like you can flick a light switch and all of a sudden the light comes on. Oh, I feel great and I love myself and I release all of those other emotions. It doesn't happen that way. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes connection. And it takes working through some of that really difficult emotional stuff. And so I love the way that you were talking about putting in that hard work and that it's something that is going to keep changing. And
Absolutely.
I'm sorry to hear that one of your sons is going through some of that addiction and substance abuse. It is unfortunately not uncommon.
Yes. Again, I think life, sometimes we think, okay, once I get to this level, then it's going to be like smooth sailing and everything. But what it is, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but it's challenging. It's like that big challenge, where you're sweating and your muscles hurt and it's achy and you want to slow down. And sometimes you do. And maybe sometimes you slip backwards and then life gives us what it gives us. And again, in this particular thing that we're going through, again, as a family, again, it's something like, I never dreamed in my wildest dreams that this was how my life, and I would experience these things in my life. And I've got to reframe too how I word things, because that too, in our speech and the way that we talk about things, matters. It's not just the thoughts, but it's the speaking of it. It's the practice of it. It's the recognizing of it. It's the constant surrender and letting go and constant trying to unattach from all of those things that we're attached to. We get so afraid of what will happen if I don't believe this anymore, but that is the only freedom that there is. And in my experience, your desire to want to be free of your suffering that is the key right there. Because if your desire is strong enough, if you don't get to that point, you're going to just go in those circles. Just will. And that's okay. But once you get to that point, you are just like, you are done with the suffering. You will do whatever it takes, and life will get there and will keep showing you those places that you need to look at within yourself.
Yeah.
Nobody else needs to change. Nobody else needs to do anything different. I love Byron Katie and her work that she has done. And it's very, very empowering. That's the key. We all want to be empowered. We all want to be free. We all want peace.
Yeah.
And nobody else can give it to us, and no other situation out there can give us the, like you mentioned earlier, the long lasting sense, the permanent sense that you have control, so that no matter what comes to you, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. If I can just go back to the untethered soul, it is those tethers that hold us in certain states in our lives, and understanding that to release them, it's not as easy as picking up a piece of string and cutting it. It takes that insight, it takes that awareness to get to that point. The good thing is that once you do have that awareness, it's not like you become unaware. That is the starting point of becoming aware where you're at, being completely and brutally honest with yourself to then forge your way forward. And that is a journey, like you said, that each of us can choose to take. And
yes, and I want to make another just real quick point too to that is I didn't do this by myself. Like I immersed myself in reading and studying and searching out those teachers, those incredible people who have learned these lessons already and have already, like Michael Singer, he's just one example of many people that have influenced me and have helped me along the way. But there's so much out there that you've got to surround yourself with with people who have walked it and are ahead of where you're at, who can help you. We're all in this together. That's another reason why I love what you're doing. This is so incredible what you're doing. People have amazing stories and have overcome incredible challenges and days, and we learn from each other. And it's just that one, how it clicks, we hear it from each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something very powerful that happens when we're hearing human voice. And I was just talking to my parents about this earlier today, and I was explaining to them why I chose the podcast medium. And I said, it's about that process of getting back to basics. And I said to them, think of it like you look at the news today and you've got boxes flashing up, you've got text scrolling along the bottom, you've got all sorts of stuff going on that is actually distracting you from what's being said. With a podcast, you have no visual distraction. You simply hone in and listen to the human voice. And the power of listening to a human voice, you may hear the same message that you've read or you've seen or you've heard someone else say to you. However, in this context, hearing one particular person's voice may resonate for whatever reason, and it may be the day that it clicks for you. And that is why I love this medium. That is why I do what I do, and I bring on people like yourself who do have a story that is relatable. It is not about interviewing celebrities per se, because for me, again, depending on who it was, some people would be distracted by who's being interviewed rather than what we're talking about. And so it's very much about championing the everyday hero, the people like you and I.
Yes.
Most of our listeners are going to go, oh, I relate to that. Oh, I get that. And that's why this podcast is so popular already. From, this little known person in Australia who is an amazingly talented, unique artist and who's been coaching and mentoring all of my life, but I wasn't doing it in the spotlight. And we talk about the untethered soul and releasing and breaking those tethers. I decided in April this year, enough was enough. My ex-husband was no longer going to hold any fear over me. Now that I say that in that way, it was actually my fear, not his, that I was holding on to. And I recognized that in April, and I said, it's time. It's time that I step out 100% online, worldwide, and show the world what I've been doing and share my story. And in that process, share all these other stories. That is what connection is. And for me, I've done a lot of speaking. I've done a lot of engagements. I've done a lot of art exhibitions. All of that was very successful, yet I was holding back. And in April, I said, you know what? I recognize there is a tether there that I have allowed to stay, and I am releasing that tether. And it's a testament to how many people are listening and connecting to this podcast. Wow. So it's something that I'm proud of, because this matters. We matter. We all matter. That's the importance of what we're doing here, sharing these stories, sharing these intimate moments that a lot of the time people do not share. And that's exactly why we need to.
I love it so much. I love what you're doing. I love your story and how you've come and through some very, very challenging hardships and how you've turned that around. And I mean, just with the success that you've had in such a short time is truly just evidence of how much we need and rely on each other. We feel less alone. It's like, it's not so shocking when someone, or we don't hide in the closet so much because there's no healing there. We can speak about the things that release that shame. There's no place for shame and guilt. There is no benefit. And so the more that we can empower each other through that versus, like you said earlier, like complaining and woe is me, that's totally different. But to be able to, and I've heard some of your episodes and I love them. I love the story so much that it's like, wow, I am not so alone. I'm so weird, you know? So, and I'm not the only one that's been through this. And even to hear that one thing like, she did that and I'm going to try that. I've been led to so many authors and so many inspirational people just by listening to a podcast and a person's name came up, and then I'll research that. And next thing you know, I've just learned so much more. It's amazing be able to reach so many people this way.
How good is that? And it is, again, about connection. And we connect in many ways. We have our 5 senses, and I only have 3.5 of those senses because I haven't had a sense of smell for something like 18 years. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, because part of my conditions is that I have very severe sinus, essentially sinusitis that's never gone away. So I've had like 3 sinus operations, and my sense of smell's never come back. And as a result, I only have sort of a half sense of taste. And even operating on those other 3.5 senses. And I remember what it was like to taste in full, and I remember what it was like to smell. And I get memory smells sometimes, which is a really weird sensation, I can tell you.
Oh my goodness.
But it's about being able to choose to immerse yourself in life. And so that connection can happen in so many ways. And I often talk to people on these podcast interviews. You can feel the other person's energy, and we are thousands and thousands of kilometers away from each other. It is one of the magical things about human beings is that energy, that if we are in tune with that and in tune with our own being, that we can feel that resonance. And I believe that transfers into the podcast and the listeners as well.
Yes, I can definitely feel it.
What are you doing now, Holly? Because I know that you do help other people and that you've chosen to find your voice. How are you now using your voice to help other people?
So I decided to start embracing change, where I have written a course, just kind of a mini course. I've got a program that's pretty intensive. It's a 10-week program that help people who have gone through loss or maybe stuck in their suffering, and walk them through a lot of what I've found that has helped me. Do very personalized, set it up very personal to that person. We cover different areas of their lives, which is what I found. I found I needed help. And when I was able to kind of break it down and categorize things, it really helped, like I mentioned earlier, kind of organize and prioritize. So we cover self-care, we cover, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, and it's not exactly in this order, but we cover relationships as they are affected. We cover emotional health and well-being, and learning to recognize all of our emotions as gifts. We go into a little bit with supporting our children and being able to be present in our family. We talk about our once needing to go back to work, our occupations, our day-to-day life, managing our home. That was another thing that I really, really struggled with. And, when everything is all chaotic and out of balance, it affects every area of our life. And then we have a module where we really delve deep into establishing and determining what your life vision is. This is something that I really didn't recognize that maybe I didn't have a life vision. I kind of had an idea. I did not realize how powerful and how important it is to create a blueprint for myself, so I'd know what in the heck direction I was going, and I wasn't just kind of floundering and things like that, like I had been pretty much my whole life, and just kind of taking whatever showed up or whatever, how important that is to have a framework and build, a solid foundation and have a vision. And so we go into that along with various spiritual practices things. And so that is what I'm doing. And I do that kind of right now on a part-time basis. I am working with homeless veterans, if you can believe that, here in California right now. And I'm helping to develop a program here. And so that's really exciting. And it's really, really interesting because a lot of our veterans do have addictions and substance abuse challenges in their lives, which is something that I'm personally experiencing in my family. So it's interesting how things work. So that's something that I can add to my understanding, I guess, and knowledge in helping people.
Oh, definitely. And I feel like I need to ask a question, and you can choose whether you answer it or not, related to that and your son's struggles at the moment. Has he told you, or does he understand the why behind his current addiction?
No. No. I mean, we're really working through that. But he really does to that level, even though he's been hospitalized and he's had seizures, and he has lost a job and he's lost a car. In fact, he just totaled his car not too long ago in an accident. And so he's still, we're still working through that. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a very tough one. And the reason I ask that question is because so many people turn to some substance. So let's just include any type of addiction here. For some people, it's food. For others, it's alcohol. It can be drugs of lots of different types, prescription, illicit. It can be gambling. There are so many different ways that people will turn to external things to try and alleviate that pain that they're in. And there's all sorts of different types of pain as well. And I wanted to just discuss a little bit about the fact that sometimes our behavior is the symptom of what's going on underneath. It doesn't always mean that we understand why we're behaving that way. And in particular, for people at that crucial age in young adulthood, it can be a chaotic time anyway to have very big things happen in life that feel very, very overwhelming. That can be a really difficult time for people. And you mentioned earlier about having a support team. It sounds like you're being a fantastic support team for your son with the professionals. And that is one of the really important messages that I do like to remind people of. You don't need to do this alone. There are people who are trained to help you, whatever your situation is. There's always someone out there who has the knowledge, has the training, and has the want to help you through this. Trying to do it all yourself, particularly when you're a mother. Again, it's impossible to manage all of this stuff on your own sometimes.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. That is so true. And I think when we are faced with these types of things, it's there's so much just we hold back. We don't want to. We want to be able to know what to do and help ourselves and not put other people out. And there's that element of maybe I've done something wrong and then not knowing what to do to help. And that is such a good point to remember. And I appreciate you sharing that lots of times where, yeah, I feel alone. I feel confused and alone, and I don't know. And in my position as mother, it's different being in a position of, professional.
Yeah, this is it. And sometimes we need that outside perspective too, because sometimes the people around us, the closest to us, are naturally very caught up in the emotions of the moment. And sometimes we need an outside perspective to come in and say, okay, this is what we need here. Let's focus on this. Let's focus on that. And going back again to something you said earlier, it's also important to be feeling that connection with other people. And so people who have gone through something similar to what we may be going through or have gone through ourselves, that often helps that connection. And quite often it's that connection that then allows us to feel a little more comfortable in sharing some of these intimate things that we've experienced and are experiencing, and some of those thoughts going through our head that maybe if we all actually spoke what was going through our head, it'd be a very different society. And the important
Amen. I agree.
Yeah. And the important thing to note is too, and I mean, I was just talking a couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with one of Australia's top lawn bowlers, Lee Schreiner, and he was saying that apparently the research says that as a human being, an average of 100 times, we will think about killing somebody. And I said to him, well, thank you for saying that, because a lot of people wouldn't admit that that is the case. But let's face it, we're all human. Sometimes these thoughts pop in there. And it's not that we need to be judging ourselves for whatever thoughts are popping in our head. And I go back to that moment in the car where you were contemplating not only taking your own life, taking the lives of your 2 children with you. Now, again, a lot of people would not feel comfortable sharing that. And I love that you've embraced that you are human. You were in so much turmoil at that point in time, and you recognized that your body was giving you signals that, hey, this is not quite right. And you listened to that. And having the thought is not the issue. It's the behavior and following up on these thoughts. That's where we run into issues.
Yes. It is being watchful of our thoughts. And like you said, there's nothing wrong. The thoughts, our minds they constantly go and thoughts pop in. It's what we do with that thought. Even if that never materialized, even if I still kept holding on to it, like a thought that doesn't materialize, but we still rehash it or retell the story and continue to strengthen it, it can really poison us in so many areas of our lives that we don't even recognize how it could be damaging relationships with people that we care about, or just limiting us in our joy that we're here to experience in life. And the power to do something about it, it just takes some practice and a lot of it. And that's okay.
Yes, it is
We can
okay.
train it. I think of it as like that wild horse. Like, you know what? I'm going to grab hold of this thought. You showed up here. What are you doing? What's the deal? What am I going to do with you now?
Yeah, it's interesting that you chose a horse, training a horse to illustrate that. The first thought that came to my mind when you said that was, well, we break horses in, don't we? Now, why do we use the term that we break them in? And I don't know an awful lot about that process. What I do understand is the word break. And you essentially were at that breaking point in your life. Something really broke for you to then recognize and move forward through it and grow so much from it.
And here's another thing I want to say too. We get to believe, we get to tell ourselves whatever stories we want to we want. I mean, and sometimes we're conscious of them, and sometimes most of the time we're not even conscious of where those stories even began, or those beliefs began about those stories that we're telling ourselves. So there was a point, and I thought, I really questioned, I thought, the more I tell this particular story, the more true it seems.
Yeah.
So, and I don't like how that feels. Like, it feels crappy. I feel bad about myself. I feel bad about other people. I feel guilty. I feel resentment. I don't want to feel that way. So what would it be like? What if I told a different story about it? And that was so empowering to recognize, like, yeah, I actually can do that. Just because I was taught this certain way, that these certain things had to, like, this meant this and this was bad, and to kind of associate the badness of something and the goodness of something else. And if it didn't look like goodness, then it was badness, and then that makes me bad. But I don't have to subscribe to that.
Yeah. It's so powerful, that rewriting the script, like you were saying earlier. We really do have that opportunity to rewrite our own script once we're aware of that thinking in the first place, once we're aware of that story. And I think it was Lisa Nichols that explains so well what fear is, that fear is the story we tell ourselves about something in the future that hasn't even happened yet.
Yes. And it seems so real.
Yeah, and the more we think about it, the more real it seems. So the example I always use to illustrate that thought process is, you watch a scary movie, you go and hop into bed for the night, and then you start hearing things, and then you're on hyper alert, and so then you start seeing shadows, and then you get to a point where you're just like, I cannot sleep, I need to get up and check that the doors are locked, that the windows are closed, and this is the way that it goes, because what we focus on, we feel, and when we focus a lot of our energy on something, we amplify it. And this works for emotions as well. And it doesn't mean that when we have an emotion that we're feeling, which is perhaps extreme sadness, that we don't address it, that we just push it away. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying here is acknowledge it and find the underlying root cause of it, focus on that, and rewriting that script and working on the issue itself. Yeah.
That is so true. And that's where I think we can get confused, because, we're all supposed to be happy and and so then when we do have these emotions that feel yucky inside, they show up for a reason. And so I've learned to appreciate those feelings, even though they don't feel well. It's like a bell ringing, like, hey, Holly, wake up. Like, you're having a thought, like, pay attention to it and challenge it. It's not, you're having a thought about something that's not true about yourself. And And so it really has helped me a lot and way more aware of my thoughts and how I respond to what's going on around me. Because if my thoughts are wrong, I'm going to respond wrong, meaning in a way I don't like.
Yeah.
To my children, to people, to my just community, to myself, all of that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm going to bring up a little scene that I'll just put into your mind for the moment. I have a set of inspirational cards that I'm creating, and I have a photograph of some marionettes. So they're the puppets on a
Mm-hmm.
string. And a very busy scene has been captured with this photo, and there's all sorts of stuff. There's people dancing, there's musicians playing, there's all sorts of things, but the image itself focuses on one main character in the middle of everything that's going on. And the quote that I created for it was, "When are you going to decide to be the director of your own play?" And those words are so powerful when
I love
when you've
it.
been through,
Yes.
yeah, and you've been through chaos, and you've been through the
Yes. Yes.
distractions, and
Yes.
it again, it's and look at the director as somebody who influences the script. They may not be the script writer, but they are writing it as they're going, because they're rewriting, and it is just so important to understand that we can take that control of how we're writing our own story in life.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it.
Now, how can people get in contact with you, Holly, if they would like to do so?
You can check out my Facebook page. My business page is Embracing Change, and also my personal profile. You can reach me that way. I've got a link to my webpage there, and you can also check out my web page. It's Embrace Your Life After Loss.com. Call with me to book a call. I like to book calls with folks first to just kind of people that are stuck. I oftentimes will have a call with someone and we talk through some things and maybe have an aha moment, and also determine if we're a good match for each other for some of my coaching programs and my one-on-one. Go from there.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love that, again, you're chasing that connection. When people are looking for a life coach, if we just put that term out there to sort of cover all, it is about that connection. It's about understanding if you're both connecting at that other level, because that's where the breakthroughs come from. So I will make sure that those links are put in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. I have totally enjoyed this, Vera-Lee. I love what you're doing.
Well, another story, more WhyMe moments, and more reasons to feel inspired to change your adversity into your advantage. An integral part of the vision of the WhyMe movement is the ICE acronym, I's for Inspire. When you feel inspired, you are more likely to take action. C is for two things, actually. Connection. You are not alone in this world. There are always people here who want to help you get through your adversity and feel positive about your life and your purpose. It is also for courage. Courage, in my opinion, is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there lies the importance of connection. For sometimes we don't feel we have the courage to do things on our own. And yet once we have the emotional support of those people who we trust, it can help us to feel that fear and do it anyway. And lastly, the E is for empower. When we have that connection and the courage and the inspiration to know, get our clarity of purpose, well, that is when we feel empowered to take the action that we want to do to change some aspect of our lives for the better. If you would like my personal support in this area to help you get through adversity in your life, you can contact me at Vera-Lee Original on social media.